Workplace psychological safety is the most pressing need we have today. But do you have the tools to transform a toxic workplace into a psychologically safe one? We have a course for that. It is called From Tormentor to Mentor, Building a Psychologically Safe Workplace. With this self-study 3-hour online course, you can equip yourself and your organization to understand workplace bullying and harassment. More importantly, our course shows you how to build a foundation for a safe and healthy workplace using the SWELL principle: safety, well-being, encouragement, and learning. Elimination of bullying will only work if a foundation of psychological workplace safety has been intentionally built and maintained. Go to shiftworkplace.co/tormentor to mentor to learn more. That's shiftworkplace.co/tormentor to mentor. Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. I have a great guest for you today. His name is Joseph Fung, and he's the CEO of Uvaro, a tech sales career accelerator, and of Kiite, a sales enablement platform purpose-built to provide sales teams with the information they need when they need it. Just-in-time sales delivery, it sounds like. He's a graduate of the University of Waterloo's computer engineering program, a repeat founder and CEO with multiple successful exits, and speaks frequently on the topics of sales leadership, diversity, and corporate social responsibility, all things I also care about, so I think we're a good match. He's an active early-stage investor who ensures that the majority of his investments are into women-led companies. I said to him, Joseph, how do we clone you? He's so good. Joseph also sits on the boards of Communitech, the Golden Triangle Angel Network, and the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony. He plays clarinet and piano and likes to support musicians. So, Joseph, welcome. I'm so honored that you're part of this podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so looking forward to the conversation, Marie.
Great. Well, let's get started right away. Tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do from your perspective.
Oh, sure. So I'm I suppose, computer engineer by training. That's what I went to school for. But straight up, I'm a terrible engineer. I should not be delivering live code because I'm so easily excited and distracted. And I've run a number of companies as a result. I really do love creating companies. And so I've run a number of them, and I've been fortunate enough to have a number of founders come along with me on the ride multiple times. And so I'm a very firm believer in building a fantastic team, a fantastic workplace. And then a lot of the details of running the business tend to sort themselves out. And so for me, a large part of that is taking care of our customers, the employees, but also the ecosystem around us. So the way we support arts, culture, the local community, those are the things that are near and dear to my heart.
I love that ecosystem concept.
Oh, it's so important. We have this great romanticized idea of an entrepreneur who toils away in their garage or their basement, and then, poof, a company comes out fully emerged. And it's so far from the truth. It's such a labor of love from everyone involved. And if you've got a great community supporting you, you have so much more success.
Yeah, and we are embedded in a geography somewhere. So contributing to the community outside of that business specifics can be so important to also building and growing the sustainability of the business, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not only from the sense of, can you build a business that contributes to a community so you can hire great talent? I mean, sure, that makes, business sense, hits the bottom line, but also your team members, your employees have families. I've got 2 young children. I want to make sure I'm contributing to a community that I want to raise them in and live in and thrive in. And you can't do that by focusing just on the business. You have to focus on everything around it too.
So can you share a couple of incidents from your childhood that you believe made you into the person you are today?
Absolutely. And I love that question because it's so hard. I've been so heavily influenced by my parents and my experiences growing up with them that it's always a challenge cherry picking them. But a couple of things that stuck out to me as I was thinking about that was one that really reminds me I've got mixed parents. So my father's from Hong Kong, my mother's mixed European, and there's a lot of cliches about Asian parents. And it's not a joke, quite literally. I remember one time in high school coming home with my report card, and you got to share it with your parents. You can't hide it. And my father literally looked at my report card, saw a 98 in one of the classes, and asked me where the other 2% was. Yeah, deadpan, completely serious. And it's funny because on one hand, it's such a cliche. And at the moment, I remember thinking, am I actually living in some kind of a sitcom or a joke? But on the other hand, it was a great reminder for me that he wasn't unreasonable in his ask. He was just challenging me to do the best I could. And in that particular class, I didn't feel like I had. And so that really stuck out for me.
Well, drive for excellence is always a great thing. The thing that many parents who ask that question don't pay attention to or don't know is that you don't control the marks. The marks are subjective. Even in a math exam, the teacher may decide to give, more or less points for certain things. And it's not like you do the work, you get the mark. You do the work, you get better marks, but you don't get 100% across the board all the time. It depends on your teacher, what they decide to do.
It's so tough. And those questions can have so many challenging consequences. I'm always so thoughtful about it when I think about how I chat with my children as a side effect. And I think those conversations with my father and my mother, my mother had a very different perspective on how to ask and answer those types of questions. I think it really enriched the way I think about being a parent and the way I think about building a workplace culture. That's always been a touchstone for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, you probably had the influence of both parents in that, which helped to mitigate. When my kids were growing up, my oldest son said, if you take dad's rules and mom's flexibility together, you're probably going to be right.
That's exactly it. That idea of hold everybody to a high standard, but also have a good balance. I think my parents provided a good balance of both perspectives. On the one hand, my father held me accountable to a great sense of quality and drive and purpose. And my mother was very much a supportive enabler. She's the one who helped me understand I can do what I set my eyes to, and I don't have to wait to accomplish it. I ran my first business when I was in high school, largely enabled by her encouragement. And I think both of them have a huge, huge impact on the type of leader and the type of person and parent that I've grown to be.
That's wonderful. What about when you were a teenager or a young adult? Any incidents that stand out for you?
I'll actually come back to that comment about my mother being an enabler. Like most teenagers, wanted to earn some cash, gain some work experience, was looking at fast food restaurants, the cliches, Taco Bell, Wendy's, McDonald's. And I remember my mother asking me if that's really what I wanted to be doing. And if I wanted to be doing something different, why wait? I was very into computers at the time. And so she gave me the opportunity to design some graphics, some business cards for her work. And that quickly became my part-time job, doing graphic design for entrepreneurs, small business owners in the local area, all driven by my mother's encouragement. And that's what helped me earn enough money to buy my own computer, do my own networking, establish my own business. And I never would have thought that I could just do that while in high school without her asking that question, why wait?
That's a great question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you could put that into your email signature, why wait?
Oh, 100%. And I didn't. I launched my first, larger company while I was at university. That idea of why wait, why not now has been such a wonderful touchstone for me.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So everybody's born into groups, and you were born into a bicultural family, and probably more than probably multiple cultures. And then did you grow up in Eastern Canada?
I did. Grew up in the north of Toronto area. Spent some time, traveling around with work and student exchanges. So had a chance to spend time in a lot of other countries and cities. But home was always the Greater Toronto area.
Right. So Toronto has an ethos too. It has a city culture, and then there would be neighborhood cultures. Mm-hmm. There's region, there's province, there's language, there's religion. All of those things that you were born into, what would you say has influenced you most?
It's hard to pick one thing.
Pick several.
The way I'd answer it, though, is actually that sense of not belonging in any one of them was actually what set the biggest mark on me. And I have two sisters, and we spent time reflecting and talking about our upbringing. And that lack of belonging, I think, was actually the biggest hallmark. To explain, a large part of my childhood was spent growing up in Sutton and Newmarket, smaller communities, not as diverse ethnically, racially, and as such, we'd always feel like we stood out a little bit. But then likewise, on the weekends, if we were going out on an excursion or visiting family friends, we might go down to Chinatown and visit friends where we didn't understand the language. So my father and those friends would chat, or we'd go for dim sum, and we didn't quite feel like we belonged because we couldn't actually order on our own. And so we spent a lot of our time growing up feeling like we didn't belong no matter where we went. But at the same time, if we needed to, we could kind of pass. So it was this interesting masquerade where you you can get away with it. Yeah, we sit at the Chinese restaurant and look like we fit in, even though we didn't feel like we belonged. We could go into a room and speak English fluently, but didn't necessarily feel like it was home. I remember one moment early on going to a friend's house. One of the first times I went for dinner at a friend's house, and I struggled because we always use chopsticks at home. And my ability to use a knife and fork was really poor. And it stood out for me in really stark relief that our home and our style wasn't quite normal. And yeah, that's a little bit uncomfortable, but it makes you also very comfortable with pushing your boundaries. And so, yeah, it's an interesting question and one we've thought about a lot.
Well, that whole dilemma of not belonging, but yet being able to jump from one group to the next and pass, and yet still always be on the outside is that whole third culture piece. So many people from mixed marriages, from people who've lived in different countries, or who moved frequently with the military. Anybody who has had that kind of an experience where they've had to jump between one place and the other and then still try and feel like they're home. It's been described as a third culture experience.
It is very much. And that sense of belonging applies also to not just folks from mixed backgrounds, but also newcomers to the community. The Canadian Association of Community Foundations does fantastic research. And in their vital signs reports, that sense of belonging so often pops up as one of the biggest challenges in communities. And so I think that's helped me understand how crucial that is to rapidly growing communities, but also what it really feels like. It's interesting, despite feeling like you don't belong, it makes it a lot easier to empathize because so many people have that same feeling.
Exactly. That's the third culture experience as well, immigration. And I'm sure that First Nations often feel the same way. I wonder if anybody really feels like they belong when you think about it.
Very apt question.
Maybe you feel like you belong to somebody you chose to spend your life with, but even then moments would be, what? I never knew that about you. Is that really what you think? I don't think we belong together.
It's an interesting thing because it also comes down to the characteristics, the artifacts that people judge you for. And I see this even in my work now. A really good example, we help train folks to land successful careers selling technology. And software as a service is a fantastic, exciting, growing space. But software as a service, we most typically say SaaS. Take the acronym, pronounce it out. One of our first students early on in the program, he was so excited. He shared that he couldn't wait to land a job at an SaaS company. And when I share that with heads of sales, more often than not, that head of sales kind of laughs and says, man, if they said that in an interview, they probably wouldn't have a second one. And it's such a jarring experience to realize that, yeah, simply because you don't recognize the community, the SaaS community says the acronym, we don't spell it out, that simply by spelling out SaaS, you could be mocked for not belonging. Yeah, that's a problem. And so it's interesting that we get to tackle this head on every single day in the work we do.
Mm-hmm. It is very interesting. So you're born into certain groups and you have to try and negotiate the differences, in your case, feeling like, what, am I in this group or not? Am I ever really going to belong anywhere? But you also chose groups as you're growing up. I'm sure that software engineering was something you chose, sales and founding companies and investing. Those were things you chose. There were probably other things you chose too, hobbies, interests. You might have learned another language or lived in another country for a while. So what groups did you choose to belong to?
Yeah, I think that sense of not quite fitting in helped push me to choose groups that were a little bit less typical. And one really good example is I've really hit it off and I've really found a home in the circus community. Folks who are studying circus arts, and maybe that's professionally. I have friends who have studied at the National School of Circus Arts in Montreal, or casually, people who practice on the weekends, be it aerial silks or trapeze. And that's led us to travel, to go to festivals, to go to Paris to see international competitions. And I don't think most people would say, hey, I'm going to find my home with folks who study circus arts. And so I guess that sense of a lack of belonging, led me to help identify maybe less typical communities to find that sense of home.
I love that as a metaphor, the circus, for people who feel like they don't belong, but they all belong to the circus community.
It's so funny. One of my most notable memories on that is with one of my last companies. We brought in a CFO, brilliant individual. He was a venture capitalist. He was a founder. He had tons of experience and we worked very well together. But we didn't recognize that there was a deep friendship until we realized we both studied circus arts. And then all of a sudden, it's like we were lifelong friends. It was fantastic.
So do you have any circus skills?
Right now, I study aerial silks. Growing up through high school and university, I studied trapeze, although I'm not particularly good, so I don't know if I'd characterize them as skills or not.
That is cool. The more I find out about you, the more questions I have. So how has circus culture influenced your leadership and culture, your sense of who you are?
I mean, one of the things that I think is true with all competitive sports, especially individual ones, is that you're always competing with yourself and pushing yourself to improve. And in our current company, one of our core values is push. The idea of challenging ourselves and each other to do better than we did the last time. And so I think that's a really easy one that you can see across a lot of my work. But I think the other one that's maybe less obvious but more profound is a deep appreciation for the individual. One of the things I see with everybody that I spend time with in that particular community is a deep, deep appreciation that different folks will have different competencies, find value in maybe different arts or different techniques or different approaches, and want to grow on a different journey. And that's okay. That idea of your path is your choice and that's okay, I find it very refreshing, but also helps me, I think, set the stage right for honest, genuine conversations at home, with family, with loved ones, at work, and in the community. So I'd say those are some of the things that I take away from them.
That's a really interesting response to the question.
Great response. It makes me wonder, did I get it right?
There is no right here. It's true to you. That's what makes it good. Well, what about temperament and personality? Let's look at that a little bit, because your temperament you're born with, and people go, yeah, that's Joseph. He was doing that when he was 18 months old, and now he's 31 or whatever you are. And he's still the same, right? You're born with that. And then the personality you add on change. And sometimes people just add the personality onto the temperament. Other times there's quite dramatic shifts. Talk to me a little bit about your temperament and your personality.
Well, when I think about my temperament and personality, I would like to describe myself as a youthful 40-year-old. So I'll go with that. It's such an interesting question. So I was, I suppose, depending on who you talk to, fortunate or unfortunate enough to get really hooked on the concept of personality type indicators really early on. Did my first one, I must have been 14 or 15. Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTP, and I periodically use the profiling tool every few years just to get a test on how I'm reading myself and how I think about it. And my wife is opposite on every single letter. So I've been consistently INTP, and she's been the opposite on every angle. The part that I find so interesting is that I'm always surprised at my own reactions to things. So as an example, I would have always described myself as a very impatient person. And I would have considered that a very core part of my personality, a desire to get the results now. That goes back to my comment about why not now. But then when we had a child who had a developmental delay, surprisingly so, he's 9 years old right now, and we've had some challenges over many years. Working with him and helping him move at his pace, cross the finish line at his time, helped me realize that, well, actually, in the right scenario, I can be a very patient person. And so maybe that means I'm just choosing not to be patient in other circumstances. And so something that I always thought was a very core element of my personality, and I'd come to accept that, I realized might be more of a choice than anything else. And so I think those are some interesting aspects about how I think about it. But if friends were going to point at kind of my behaviors or my actions, the things that have been true ever since growing up, I definitely have a strong appreciation of humor and absurd. And my sisters are still uncovering pranks that we played on each other as kids. So it's definitely a long-term characteristic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Being a prankster, I think you're definitely born with that. Sense of humor too, but I think you can acquire humor to a certain extent, and each in their own kind of individual quirky ways. But the prankster thing, that takes a certain kind of personality.
Oh, it's terrible. One of the earliest ones told one of my sisters that tomatoes have an IQ of 7 because on an IQ test, the idea of photosynthesis is worth 7 points. And since tomatoes can photosynthesize, they clearly have an IQ of 7. And it wasn't until she was in high school biology class that fact came out. And even through now, my youngest daughter loves surprising and scaring people. And I try not to reinforce the habit, but I can't help it. So I don't think it's going away.
You passed it down. It's a genetic trait.
It is. It is.
What about personality? What did you grow on? Well, you grew patience. Almost every entrepreneur says they're impatient. So you grew that. What else did you grow?
Extroversion. So for those who are familiar with Myers-Briggs, that introvert versus extrovert angle, I've always been extremely introverted. My way of regaining energy, rebalancing myself is, soaking in a bath, reading a book, spending time with my music, solitude. As an entrepreneur, as a founder, you have to learn how to be effective publicly in large groups, how to re-energize yourself when you don't get that alone time. And I've had to acquire a lot of, those skills and traits. And even now, when I'm meeting new people, when I'm spending time with folks, often the feedback I get is they're very surprised when I describe myself as an introvert. And a lot of that is learned behavior. And I suppose some of that has become more internalized, and I'm probably more extroverted than I originally was. But I see it every single day, how those characteristics, can be both learned and intrinsic at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very thoughtful response. So you've already mentioned this a couple of times when you talked about feeling like you didn't belong. But can you recall a time when you became aware that your cultural understandings were specific to your culture? And that culture could just be the culture of your family that you guys came up with, your own culture that you created. But it can be other things too. So can you think of a time when you just ran up against something and went, whoa, this is not how everybody thinks about things or views the world. That must be me. That must be my culture.
It's so interesting because my parents saw the world very differently and they had such unique experiences. I felt like I was hit with those all the time. And so I became very acclimatized to them growing up. And simple things like early on, I would have been 9 years old, 10 years old when we were building our own house. So literally we grew up on a construction site. We were putting up joists and trusses and roofing it. And remember friends with their parents coming over and catching us using drill guns and reciprocating saws and knocking down huge portions of walls. And they were aghast that our parents would let us use these power tools. And for us, the reaction was like, well, yeah, they're going to teach us how to use it sensibly and safely. And that's a better idea than just being scared of them. But those things helped us realize that our parents, and as a result, our family was comfortable with a level of thoughtful risk that was not conventional. And so I think we got a chance to see that and build that muscle many times over many years, ever since we were young.
That's a great story. Did you ever read the Book of Negroes?
I have not had a chance. It is on my list of books to read, but the list is longer and gets longer every day, so I've not had the chance.
I think it's one of the most influential books of the century. But there's a piece in there where the heroine of the story, who's 7 years old, her father teaches her how to read and write in Arabic, and they're in Africa, and she only finds out which country later on. And then her mother, who's a midwife, teaches her how to deliver a baby. She's 7 years old, and she knows how to deliver babies in all sorts of complex situations. And she actually needs to use that skill when they're on a ship. She's the only person who can help the women who are delivering their babies on the slave ship. And people don't believe that a 7-year-old could do this. And everybody else was saying, you shouldn't be teaching these things to your children. Well, that skill that she had and that ability to read and write from a young age in Arabic and allowed her to learn how to read and write in English and other languages too. And it's just, what your parents did was to say, this is a skill, anyone can learn it. We just have to put the right parameters in place so that it's safe, but people need to know how to do these things. And so you learned those life skills early on.
That's a fantastic anecdote. I have not heard the book positioned in such a personal way. I can't let it linger so long on the list, so I'll be sure to pull that up. Thank you, Marie.
Yeah, she has in her mind that she's going to become the storyteller of the tribe, and she becomes the storyteller through her life. It's quite amazing. I think you'll love it. I think you'll identify with it. It's the only book I've read over the past 20 years that I read twice. Yeah.
That's a strong endorsement. Thank you.
Well, that was a bit of a rabbit trail, but let me just come back to you. We're getting sort of close to the end of the interview, and I always like to ask people, how is the best way to work with you? What would you say about, if somebody is working with me, if I have a client, or if I take on a new investment, what do they need to know about working effectively with Joseph Fung?
It's such a good question. One of the things that I believe really strongly is giving new team members, new employees, a bit of a blueprint for how I work. So these questions are top of mind. We're onboarding new employees right now. So I answer this question regularly. There's really two things that I point to. The first is that I have a voracious appetite for information. Folks will often say things like, hey, keep me in the loop, or I like to know. I very much appreciate that. The idea of, even if you just caught me on something, forward something I might use. I mean, in my role as a CEO, a large part of my job is to observe what's happening in our company in the different areas, what's happening externally in the ecosystem, in the community, elsewhere, and draw those connections. And the more information I have, the better I can do that. So I do have a voracious appetite. I read a ton and I consume a lot. And so that often surprises people. I'm asking for information not because I don't trust them, but because I love and have a thirst for that knowledge. And then the second thing is, I deeply believe in the idea that feedback is a gift. I welcome it. I invite it. I also try to share it as much as I can. And that can be as minimal as, hey, typo, or something I'm working on, or something more profound in the way I'm leading and governing. And I really try to set up the systems as well as the open, safe environment to bring that in. And I think it's sometimes disarming for people who are fresh or newly working with me, how genuine I am in soliciting that feedback and how frequently I ask, because I think some people don't expect that of their leaders all the time. And I think that's unfortunate, and I strive to set a new example.
Well, the old model is hold everything close to your chest and never reveal your cards, and don't ask people for things because you're the boss. And that's just being seen more and more as not effective. You make more mistakes, the company loses more money, people lose their trust. Actually, communicate like NASA. NASA, they have this thing where, over communicate and constantly check in with people. How's it going? How are you feeling today? What's working for you? What details troubling you today? And just, you keep on doing that, because otherwise they'd go crazy in space. And what you've learned in working as a CEO who's constantly seeking information and feedback is probably going to be really helpful to the mental health of people through this pandemic.
100%. And not just checking in on how they are, but helping people remember that process of checking in is how they can care for each other as well. Mm-hmm. So it's important to build that resiliency throughout the organization. So it's not just between me and my team, but between my team members and each other as well.
And knowledge is developed collectively. Mm-hmm. So if you don't interact, there's this, interesting chaos theories out of vogue right now, but some of the books that were written about chaos theory earlier on, they were talking about bird behaviors, and the birds that are the most social are the ones that learn the most and the fastest, and the ones that are isolated and territorial, they've been doing the same behaviors for centuries. It's
so interesting, the parallels that we can draw from not just literature and our own experiences, but even the animal kingdom. I completely agree. Mm-hmm.
Well, what would you like to promote? Here's your spot to stand on the soapbox and go for it.
The big thing, I suppose, that I'd love to promote is our training programs. We run a training program that helps folks who maybe were in sales or customer service in other industries land amazing roles at technology companies. And in today's environment, and with all the impacts of COVID and work from home, we get a chance to help so many more people than we ever thought or imagined possible. So if you have anybody in the audience or know someone who is looking to make that transition and make a change in their career, they could visit our site, connect with us. I'm always happy to chat with folks. Our website is Uvaro, UVARO.com, and we're always happy to connect. So that's what I'd emphasize.
Yes, and in your training program, I think you explained to me, let me see if I got this right. It's 12 weeks long. Mm-hmm. People apply to be in it. You want to see if it's a fit. You're not saying, okay, let's look for someone who's newly graduated out of software engineering school. You're looking for people who are in career transition. That's
absolutely right. Most of our students are folks who they've already worked, 1, 2, 4, 5 jobs. We have folks who are at the tail end of their career and the middle of their career and realize that the trajectory of their career isn't heading in the direction they want. And what our program does is equips them with some new skills, but moreover, helps them navigate this somewhat opaque world of technology. Because you can find success in the educational sector through technology, in advertising, in not-for-profits. And we've helped people who, worked in oil and gas fields, where they're worried for their life and limb because of workplace incidents, now sell software from the safety of their living room. We've helped pastors. We've helped people who sold Harley Davidsons. It's really such a fun process. And like I mentioned earlier, I like creating businesses where people can do their best work. And now we get to do that with individuals as they launch new careers every single day. It's super energizing.
So just to make sure I didn't miss anything, this is a training course, but it's not just a course. What you do is you also help match people to potential employers?
That's right. So it's a training program, 12 weeks, 2 hours a day, for 5 days a week. We also pair you with a career coach, a career advisor who can help with interview prep, practice, your resume, and then we introduce you to our network of over 900 technology companies. And we believe in this model so strongly. Yes, while some students pay tuition up front, most choose the option of an income share agreement where they don't actually pay any tuition till they land a full-time job, and then it's geared to the role that they earned.
Oh, this is so pandemic friendly.
I wish that I could say we're really brilliant. We just had some very fortunate timing.
It's perfect. I really love it. And you find people work across North America in a variety of technology positions, which is also really unique.
It's really amazing. The current environment has forced a lot of technology companies to mature much faster and get comfortable with remote work much faster. So we have folks in Nova Scotia working for firms in Ontario. We have folks in New York working for firms in British Columbia, folks in Los Angeles who work for firms in Toronto and then relocate. It is a blast.
Cool. I love it. Well, what would you like to share? Is there anything else you'd like to share? Anything I missed? Something you would like to say further?
Nothing really profound, I suppose, other than a word of encouragement. It is a tough time out there. There's a lot of change, a lot of disruption, but there's light at the end of the tunnel. We're getting through it. And there's always an opportunity to take that next step forward. And there's no need to wait. There's no need to wait till we get through all of this. You can always take a look at it and say, why not now? So I'll leave things with that.
That's a great way to end it. Why not now? I love it. Thank you so much, Joseph, for this wonderful, insightful interview and for sharing your time with the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners.
My pleasure, Marie. Thank you so much for having me on.
Joseph Fung is an active early-stage investor who ensures that the majority of his investments are women-led companies. He also sits on the boards of Communitech, the Golden Triangle Angel Network, and the Kitchener-Waterloo Symphony. A clarinet and piano player himself, he likes to support musicians. And a graduate of the University of Waterloo's computer engineering program, Joseph is a repeat founder and CEO, speaking frequently on the topics of sales leadership, diversity, and corporate social responsibility. I loved my interview with Joseph Fung and found him a very fascinating individual with multiple talents. It was a great experience, and I hope you love it as much as I did. Thank you so much for listening to the Culture and Leadership Connections podcast. I hope you will take the time to rate us so we can continue with our goal of 10,000 listeners. And may Culture and Leadership Connections continue to guide and inspire your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much. Hey, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Do you love these insightful and moving interviews published twice monthly for your listening pleasure? You may not know that it costs between $300 and $500 per month to pay for our podcast episodes. Shocking, but true. Well, now you can help support this podcast by showing your love with a little skin in the game real money on the Patreon website. For as little as $5 or as much as $50 a month, you can contribute to keep Culture and Leadership Connections alive and healthy. Your donation is invaluable in helping us connect the hearts and minds of people across cultures and professions for happier and more humane workplaces. I know you will call on your inner generosity, knowing that your contribution is a practical demonstration of love and support. Check out the patreon.com/culture and leadership connections page to see what subscription level feels right for you and find out about the special loyalty perks at each patron level. That's spelled Patreon, patreon.com/culture and leadership connections. Thank you for your generosity.